All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Purim Boot Camp. I hope you guys are ready. This is it. This is where we get ready for the holiday. This is going to be high energy, a lot of learning, a lot of great conversation. Okay, so tonight's session of Purim Boot Camp is dedicated by Merle Solomon in honor of her mother, in memory of her mother-in-law, Sadie Solomon, Anthony's mom, whose yard site is on Purim. So, of course, it's our wish and our hope that Sadie's memory be for blessing, and Anthony and Merle, of course, be blessed with long life and Hashem's eternal and abundant goodness. All right, so thank you. Let's jump in because we have so much to get to tonight. As I mentioned, tonight's topic is Purim, and when it comes to Purim, so there are, we read the Megillah every year. And we have the story of the book of Esther that we go through twice on the holiday at night and during the day. And yet, no matter how many times we study the book of Esther, there's always new information, right? No matter how many times you study, there's always something to discover. And I want to point out that there is a verse that is almost so obvious that it becomes like unseeable. Are you with me on this? Sometimes things are so obvious, you don't even see it. No. It's like hidden in plain sight. You ever hear that expression? No. Hidden in plain sight, like the nose in your face. You can't even see it. It's hidden in plain sight. It's hidden so well. It's so obvious. No one sees it. No one notices it. I'm telling you, you've seen this verse dozens of times. And yet I would venture to say it never like evoked a question. We're going to cite the verse, raise the question, and it will open up a brand new understanding of the message of the holiday, as well as the nature of Mordechai. Tonight's boot camp class is entitled Mordechai, Hero or Villain. Yes, hero or villain. Man who was beloved by all, or man who was disdained by the populace. This is what we will be talking about tonight. Buckle up, we're in for a bumpy ride. Now, the first thing we're going to do, because it's important to get context, the first thing I want to do is give you a very quick recap, like super quick recap of the book of Esther, of the Megillah. So now two things. Number one, it is called Megillat Esther. Megillat Esther literally means, what's a Megillah? Scroll. Literally means the scroll of Esther. It's sometimes called the book of Esther, the scroll of Esther, the Megillah for short. Either way, it's the same thing. It's one of the 24 holy books of scripture. For those of you that took our recent JLI course called Book Smart. So in lesson 1, we spoke about the 24 holy books of the written Torah. The book of Esther is one of them. So it's canonized, it's codified as one of the books of Jewish scripture. It contains a total of, I'm forgetting. Is it 9 or 10 chapters? 1 second. It's on in person for all of us here. We're going to be looking at, open up your Chumash to the back. It's 12. And that needs to be, was it 1252?
1261.
1252. Well, it starts on 1252 and there are 10 chapters, right?
Yeah.
And the 10th chapter consists of a grand total of 3 verses, which we're going to speak about. So 10 chapters. I am going to give you the Cliff Notes or the Sparks Note. These are going to be the quick version of all 10 chapters. You ready? Chapter 1. This is all for context. Chapter 1 of the book of Esther sets the stage for the conversation, the drama, by letting us know that there was a king named Achashverosh. He threw a party, and at the party, he had his wife killed. That's what happens when you say too many l'chaim. You say too many l'chaim, what could happen at the end is things get violent. He had his wife killed. Why did he have his wife killed? Because he called her in to entertain the crowd, and she refused. And so he killed her in his drunken state. Well, chapter 2 talks about the aftermath. So what happens when he sobers up and he realizes there's no more Mrs. Achashverosh, there's no more Vashti was her name. So what does he do in chapter 2? He searches for a new queen. And who does he choose as the new queen? None other than Welcome, welcome. Hey guys, welcome. It's great to see you. All right, we got Mike and Amy. The world is in a good place. Come on in. We're doing a quick recap of 10 chapters of the Book of Esther, and then we're going to jump in to the main theme. So, chapter 1, we read about the party. 1252 is, we're just going to go through the Megillah very quickly. 1252. So, chapter 1, party, and the I don't know what would you call it? The killing, the murder. Execution. Thank you, Mom. Yes, the execution of Vashti. Chapter 2, the search for the new queen. And who does he choose as the queen? A young woman named Esther, Jewish girl. Her cousin is Mordechai. We're introduced to Mordechai as well. That's chapter 2. Chapter 3. What happens in chapter 3? I'm so glad you asked. In chapter 3, we learn that the king appoints a really big anti-Semite. My apologies, a really big anti-Semite to be his in a prominent position, and in doing so, give me a quick second. Welcome. Come on in. So in appointing Haman, who's a big Jew hater, so Haman asked the king for permission to destroy the Jewish people. So the plot is hatched. The negative plot, the plot against the Jewish people is hatched in chapter 3. Again, chapter 1, the queen is dead. Chapter 2, the new queen is appointed. Chapter 3, Haman is elevated in position, and he requests the annihilation of the Jewish people, and the king signs off on it. All right, next, chapter 4. The Jews get wind of the challenge. The Jewish people get wind of the plot of annihilation, and they spring into action, led by Mordechai, the queen's cousin, right? Who's the other hero, as we think in the story. He springs into action, and he sends a message to his cousin, the queen, saying you have to intervene. And she says, "Who am I? I don't want to intervene. It's dangerous." And Mordechai said, "If not you, if not now, then who and when? And if it's not going to be you, it'll be someone else. But you were put in this position as a Jew, the Jewish queen, to save the Jewish people. The decrees against." And she says, "Okay, I got this." That's chapter number 4. Chapter number 5. Quick recap. Chapter number 5. Esther goes to the king, and she approaches the king, and she says to the king, "I have a request." And the king says, "Whatever you want." And she says, "I want to have a banquet, a feast. I want to go out to dinner together." And the king says, "Great." And what happens is, at that feast, he says to her, "Okay, so why did you call this dinner? Why did you call this banquet?" Imagine, right? King and queen, they go out. It's busy to be the king. It's busy. Always appointments, always, public things. And so now you have the opportunity. So the queen asks, "Can we just go out?" He says, "Yes, absolutely." And they go out. What happens? As they're going out, again, this is chapter 5, as they're out on this private date, the king says, "So, why did you call this date? It's great to spend time together. What would you like?" She says, "I want to go on another date with you and Haman." You with me on this? "I want to go out with you and this other guy." Okay, already things are sounding a little weird. Like you can imagine how Achashverosh might feel. Yes? Like, why is this guy? Who is this guy? Why is she interested in this guy? Why is he joining us on our... Okay. Chapter 6, the dramatic night where the king cannot sleep. That night, the king can't fall asleep. And as he's up in his insomnia that night, so Haman is actually coming to visit him, and he says, "Why are you here?" And well, actually, I don't think he asked him why you're here, but he says, "I was thinking about it and remembering that there is a man," I forgot to mention, chapter 2, Mordechai eavesdropped about something and saved the king's life, assassination plot against the king, and he saved the king's life. And so the king remembers this night when he can't sleep, and as Haman approaches, he doesn't like Haman at this point. Why doesn't he like Haman? because he doesn't know what's going on. He's suspicious. It's like his wife wants to have another private date with him and Haman. Like, what is that? Yeah.
Haman was at the first date too.
Haman was at the first date.
And the second.
Let's double check. Hold on 1 second. 5-4. It's just Haman. Yes. What is your petition? Petition is as follows. Yes, you are right. Good. She's at the first date. Yes. Thank you very much. So she says date 1 together. Thank you for clarifying that. Day 2 together. At that point, they already went out, all 3 of them. Now again, all 3 of them. Now it's getting weird. And then at night, who's prancing around the palace at night, in middle of the night, when everyone should be sleeping? Haman. No, the king's up. Who's prancing? No, who's like around the palace? Haman. And he says, this guy. All right, so he says, all right, you're going to honor Mordechai. He knows he doesn't like him. You're going to honor Mordechai. You're going to lead him around on a horse and say, this is what's done to the person that the king wishes to honor, etc. All right, that's what happens in chapter 6. Already the tide is turning because now you have Haman, right? You have Haman honoring Mordechai. You have the guy who hates the Jews honoring the Jews. Things are already shifting. The tide is turning. And now, after he honors him by leading him in a horse and in front of the street and saying, here's what's done to the man who the king wishes to honor, at that point, they tell him, time to go to your second banquet. That is chapter 7. In chapter 7, they go to their second feast together. Once again, the king says, what's going on, Esther? Whatever you want, but just tell me like what's going on. And she says, there's a guy who hates me and my people, who wishes to destroy us. And the king says, who is this? And she says, that guy. You can imagine at this point, he is primed to want to get rid of Haman anyway. Are you with me? She's already planted the seeds of distrust, the seeds of jealousy, the seeds of paranoia in the king's head. The king can't sleep that night. Why do you think the king can't sleep? You always think about it was a miracle. He couldn't sleep. And Haman comes in, miracle? Or the guy is like, he can't sleep because his wife is basically playing with his head, but for a good purpose in the sense that ultimately it ends with the king being so upset that the moment she says, and you know who the bad guy is? This guy, he's like, let's get rid of him. She was total setup, and now he's gone. So that is chapter 7 in the book of Esther. Haman is hanged on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordechai, etc. Chapter 8. So now the aftermath. So what happens next? Now at this point, there was a decree against the Jewish people. You cannot rescind the decree in ancient Persia. So they had to set another royal decree, send it out throughout the nation that says that the Jews are able to defend themselves and even preemptively defend themselves. And so the Jewish people do that. And they are, so that message goes out. That message goes out. The Jews are able to defend themselves, which leads to chapter 9, which is when the battle takes place and the Jews defeat their enemies. And those that were looking for Jewish blood themselves ended up dead, including the 10 sons of Haman. And that's how the story, and there was joy and gladness and rejoicing throughout the land. And they established Purim as a holiday in commemoration. They wrote the book of Esther. They says, we wrote the scroll. When the reader on Purim reads it, he shakes the scroll as he says, it's a meta moment. He's reading the Megillah. The Megillah talks about writing the Megillah. He's like, hey, that's what we're doing. We're reading this scroll. And it seems like everything could end in chapter 9. But then there's chapter 10. And literally the chapter 9 ends. Hey, welcome. It's literally designated. So in the 32nd verse of the 9th chapter, it says, now Esther's order confirmed these. I'm reading in, I have an online translation, so it's going to be a little bit different than here. It says, now Esther's order confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was inscribed in the book. Basically, Purim was established as a holiday, written about in the book, and that's what we have here. And then there's chapter 10. And everyone's wondering, what possibly could there be? From Vashti's death to from her execution to Esther's appointment, to Haman's appointment, to the decree, to the strategy, to the execution, all puns intended, of that strategy, and then ultimately the downfall of Haman and the war and the Jewish victory, and everyone is saved, and we have a holiday, as the famous Jewish line goes, they try to kill us, we won, let's eat, everything seems great. Chapter 10 is the most bizarre, and I'm telling you, it's hidden in plain sight. It's absolutely hidden in plain sight. It's the very last verses, and no one pays attention. You know why? Because it's like at the end of the whole Megillah. It's in the ganze Megillah, right? It's the end of the whole thing, and everyone's like, okay, we're basically done. Let's go break out the Hamantash. What does it say? What do the last three verses say? Chapter 10. Let's take a look-see. I'm going to read it in the translation that we have here. It's in our this Stone edition. I don't like this. I don't like the translation whatsoever. I'm going to read my translation. I have an online translation from Chabad.org. Okay, here we go. Chapter 10. You can follow along in this, and you'll see where it's modified a little bit, but it's very important. And King Achashverosh imposed a tribute on the land and on the isles of the sea. Very nautical. And all the acts of his power and his might, and the full account of Mordechai's greatness, how the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? In other words, Mordechai was so great, they wrote about him in their own Persian, Media and Persia. Right? He made it into the media. Anyway, he made Parasamade, those nations, those countries, he made it there. He was big. And then the final verse, the very final verse. You know what's crazy about the final verse? Everyone says it. There are certain verses, there's several verses, a handful of verses of the Megillah that the custom is that everybody in the synagogue says it out loud. They themselves read it out loud. Typically, you hear it. The one reader reads it, you hear. There's a few verses where everyone says it out loud. This is one of them, and we still don't pay attention. Look what it says. For Mordechai the Jew was viceroy to King Achashverosh, and great among the Jews, and accepted. I know it's not the translation you guys have, but listen to this. And he was accepted by most of his brethren, seeking the good of his people and speaking peace to all their seed. I love that, right? Isn't that interesting? This translation is not going to work, but he was accepted, he was liked by most of his brethren. Wow. The last verse of the Megillah, we're going to throw a backhanded compliment like that. This guy was so beloved, most of the Jews were into him. Most of his brethren liked him. It's like the joke that they say about the rabbi who gets sick. He's in the hospital, and the president of the board comes to visit him, and he says, "Rabbi, I have good news and bad news." He says, "What's the good news?" He says, "The good news is, on behalf of the board, I'd like to wish you a refuah shlema, a speedy recovery." Rabbi says, "What's the bad news?" So the bad news is the vote was 5-4. Right? Terrible. All right. Tough crowd. What's the point? The point is, we're saying that Mordechai, he was beloved by most of his brethren. What's the most? L'roiv echad, the majority. Multitude is still not a majority. No, I have the same as you. Means majority. Most of it. The majority. The majority. The roiv echad, not kol echav. Kol is all. Roiv is most.
Could be 5 to 4.
Could be 5-4. The majority. 1 over 50%. 50.01%. He was beloved by.
But we're going to go with it.
What does that mean? So first of all, so many questions. Number one, why do we need chapter 10? What is it even telling us? We're not even going to get into the idea that Achashverosh put a tax on the country as well as the island nations, and it ends almost with a tribute to Mordechai, almost like the Torah ends with a tribute to Moshe, like his final what is it called? Epitaph? Epitaph. Whatever, however it's pronounced. Right. So
The last Torah.
yeah, like it's his tribute. So the Torah ends with Moshe's tribute, but the Torah goes all out. There was never a prophet like Moses, spoke to God face to face, etc. Moses is the greatest. And the Megillah ends, Mordechai, most of his brethren liked him. Most really, either, you know what, our mothers, and my mothers are here, but our mothers would tell us, if you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. Tell me that he was beloved by most of his brethren. Are you kidding me? And by the way, as I said, this is hiding in plain sight. This is the very last verse of the Megillah. And it's the one that everyone says out loud in synagogue. Purim is in a week from what, tonight, last night? Monday. Monday night is Purim. Great. It's coming up really soon. Monday night is Purim. We're going to hear the Megillah twice, Purim night and Purim day, the next day. And you're going to get to the end of the Megillah, and we're going to repeat we're going to say the verse, then the reader is going to repeat it, and we'll pay zero attention to it. And if we did, it would strike us immediately as a question. And the question is, why are we giving such a bizarre pseudo compliment to Moses that actually is not a compliment at all? That's the core question we're going to address. Maybe the Persians wrote it. Maybe that was their ultimate, you killed us. At least we're going to write that not everyone likes you. So here's the question. The question is, what is it? Let's start with the simplest question. Aside from, just why even write this? If you're not going to really go all out, then just leave it. So the first question that we're going to address is, what does it mean that he was beloved by most of his brethren? Who first of all, who were his brethren? And second of all, why weren't they into him? Do you have to hear that 1 second? And we go twice or once covers mitzvah twice. Mitzvahs hear it twice. But if you hear it once, I mean, that's 50% is better than nothing, but the ideal is twice. By the way, it says he was great among the Jews and accepted by most of his brethren. So there's Jews and brethren. They're not the same. To use two expressions. So the Jews would be the people. Who are his brethren? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start. You guys have the printouts and the booklets. We're going to start with text 1b. Okay, we're going to start with text 1b. And Karen, if you don't mind, I'm going to pull up. See if I have the PDF of this. I do. And wait, guys, give me a very quick second here so I can pull this up. Okay, amazing. I have this. I'm going to share my screen. And Karen, if you don't mind, please take it away. Text 1a we did. Please start with text 1b.
1b, accepted by most of his brethren, but not by all his brethren. For part of the Sanhedrin disassociated from him when he became close to the government and neglected his studies.
Wow, right? Everyone's like, ooh, right? Like drama, intrigue, what's going on? I'm going to keep this up on the screen for another few moments so you can see it. By the way, this comes from Rashi on the verse that we read, the very last verse of the book of Esther. So what does it mean by most of his brethren? Not all. Rashi literally says, Raiv echav v'lai kol echav, and not kol. Right? Kol means all, rov means most. Not all. Why? Literally his brethren, meaning his colleagues, not the people. People were easy. His brethren, meaning his colleagues, his peers. His peers in the Sanhedrin. What's the Sanhedrin? Sanhedrin is the high Jewish court. 71 judges. The Sanhedrin, he was a member. Mordechai, he wore many hats. He was one of the hats that he wore in the community as a leader. He was a member of the Sanhedrin, which is a very exclusive group. Judges, scholars, leaders, etc. And literally Rashi says, members of the Sanhedrin, it's like the Supreme Court. Members of the Sanhedrin disassociated from him. We don't want anything to do with him. Why? Because he became close to the government and neglected his studies. What does it mean simply? In simple language, you know what it means? Here's a guy who was a scholar, a leader, a spiritual leader, a Jewish legal leader, and now where is he hanging out? By the end of the story of the Megillah, where is he hanging out? Yeah, with Achashverosh, the Persian king, in the palace, in Persia, with no studies. And what's he doing? Playing politics. Imagine imagine a great rabbi, leader of a community. The next thing you know, he's running for senator, governor, vice president. Say what? Okay, good luck. Sure, you'll do good things, but they lost respect for him. They disassociated. They said, all right, you want to play politics? Okay, go for it. Hero or villain? He's clearly a hero in the story. But the question is, what happens after the story? What happens when the credits, shall we say, scroll at the end of the Megillah? See what I did there, right? What happens when the what happens when the closing credits roll and the story ends? Where are all our characters? It's like, at the end of a movie, the black screen comes up. There's some white text that says, in 1982, this guy, he gives you what happened next, what the aftermath, some text about the aftermath. Here's what happens. Mordechai, some of his colleagues disassociated themselves from him. Seems very harsh. And I've explained it, but it seems very harsh. Take a look at text number 2. And remind me, I know we met on Shabbat, but remind me your name. Tamara? Mm-hmm. Okay. Please read text number 2. This is from the Ben Ish Chai. Yeah. Take it away.
From the fact that it states that only a minority dissociated, we can infer that the majority didn't agree and sided with Mordechai.
Well, thank God for that. According to the Ben Ish Chai, only some, we don't know how few is some, but it's only the minority that disassociated from Mordechai, but the majority still side with Mordechai. In other words, Mordechai made a life choice. He said, I'm going to hang out in the palace with Achashverosh and my cousin Esther, who's the queen. I'm going to hang out in the halls of power and government. And the Sanhedrin, the court, Jewish leadership, study, Torah study, spare time. So most were okay with that. To be fair, most of his scholars were okay with that. There were definitely some that were not okay with that.
We would not be talking Jews
if it was unanimous, right? You're saying if all Jews were on the same page, this definitely would not happen. Okay, good, fine. So now part of the reason for this split opinion is because when it comes to politics, when it comes to forget politics, positions of leadership, Jewish wisdom is split on the matter. There are some sources that indicate that being in a leadership position, I don't mean a Jewish leadership position, like a rabbinic, but like more of a political leadership type role. So there are some sources that indicate that it is a very good thing. It's great. You can help out the community. You're an advocate, activism, etc. Other sources seem to indicate that you should avoid it. So in other words, it seems like the split position amongst Mordechai's colleagues is based on a general dual position within Jewish thought as to whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. This meaning being in a position of leadership. Let's take a look at some sources that speak to this. These are by no means the only sources, but here are 2 sources that speak to this duality. All right, we're going to skip to text 4a for the moment. Text 4a. All right, so this is Rambam Maimonides and his laws of reading the Shema. He says something very interesting. Roberto, please read 4a.
If one is engaged in the story of the Torah and the time has come to read the Shema, they should interrupt studying and read the Shema and recite the blessing before and after it. If one is engaged in public duties, they should not pause while it complete them, and then read the Shema if there is still time.
So one second. The Maimonides, and this is, by the way, this is not theory, this is halacha, this is Jewish law. Rambam Maimonides says the following. You're studying Torah, Shema is supposed to recite it twice a day. But the Shema in the morning and the evening, it has a window because morning is not all day and evening is also not all night. So there's a window for the morning, a window for the evening. So let's talk about the morning. So the window is a few hours into the day, 3 hours into the day, etc. So let's say 6 to 9 a.m. approximately, not exactly, is your window for Shema in the morning, for the morning Shema. Great. Well, let's say you're studying Torah and you plan on studying between 5 and 10 a.m. So what do? So Rambam says, Maimonides says, that you should stop. You should literally stop studying Torah, say the Shema, and then you should continue. But what happens if you're not studying Torah, if you're engaged in public duties? In other words, you're involved in your leadership position, on a political level, whatever it is, on public duties, whatever that means. And now it's time to say the Shema. What does it say? Don't interrupt. Don't interrupt, right? Complete the duties that you have, complete the task at hand, and then if there's still time, say the Shema. In other words, which is greater, Torah study or public duty? Based on this, public duty.
Maimonides himself was in public. Yeah.
That's right.
That's the thing
You're saying
about
he's biased on this. Okay, Maimonides certainly had his own experience, but he's presenting this as Jewish law. And again, the Jewish law is that when it comes to Torah, you interrupt Torah for the Shema. When it comes to public duties, don't interrupt. So public duties clearly is a good thing. Well, that's text 4a. I told you it's a mixed bag. Let's take a look at text 4b. I'm sorry, text 4b explains it. Text 4b explains the conclusion here that we just came to. Roberto, please read this one. It's the bookend to what you read before.
Okay, 4B, right?
Yep.
Okay, immerse that 4B means the great event that is crossing Torah, the story 4. When it comes to reciting the Shema, even one exclusively dedicated to Torah story to Moses to law, their studies, whether one engaged in community service should not.
Okay, so he concludes the Lechem Mishnah, which is a commentary on Maimonides, commentary on Rambam. He says clearly what we concluded, right? That public need, Sarche Ram, I don't like public need. That when you're working on behalf of the community, that's greater than studying Torah. Why? Because when it comes to the Shema, you interrupt for one and you don't interrupt for the other. So clearly, serving the public is of a very high order. That's one side of the argument. Yeah.
I don't understand why you don't say the Shema when you do your morning stuff and then go to do your public duties.
I don't know. He's
after early morning.
It sounds like he's being called into some sort of meeting, communal meeting, or some sort of emergency election day. He's working the polls. Who knows, right? You never know. I hear you, but sometimes the Shema, the window only starts at a certain point in time. So it could be that you had to start, you were pulled in earlier and it's going to end later, like in my example, 5 to 10. So, and the window's only 6 to 9. So what do? So you don't say it. If you're working on behalf of the public, you don't say it. So this seems to indicate, the bottom line is it seems to, and there are other sources, seems to indicate that public service is of a tall order. However, text 5, Amy, please read this one from the Talmud.
What is the meaning of the words in the verse, imprison them? Joshua said to Moses, place responsibility for the needs of the public upon them, and they will aspire on them.
So here we have something fascinating. This is the story in the book of Numbers, and I'll try to refresh your memory. This is a story in the book of Numbers where the people are asking for. I have to refresh my memory. I think the people ask for meat, and Moses says to God, I'm out. I don't even know what to do anymore. Like I can't. I only bustle. Where am I going to get meat from? And so God says, all right, take it easy. You're going to emanate Itzaltim and Aruch. I'll separate from your spirit and place it on others, and they will be prophets like you, and they can also help with the people, etc. And so they chose 72 divided by 12 is that 6? 6. They chose 6 members of each tribe to be bestowed upon by this prophecy. Okay. To be part of this exclusive group. The problem is there's only 70, meant to be 70 of these, but you do 6 times 12, you get 72. So they had 2 extra. Hey, come on in. No worries, you're good. Yeah, it's fine. I don't know if she's coming. She may not be coming back, but she is coming back. Okay, fine. Thanks. Good, Roz, good eye. Good eye. Thank you. Yes, thank you. Okay, so what happens is so they chose 72 people, but only 70 of them were going to receive the spirit of prophecy. So how do you decide which 2 are not going to get? In other words, they told the tribe, pick 6 leaders from each tribe, but that's 72, and they could only have 70. So here's what they did. They put 72 sheets of paper or whatever they had. And on 70 of them, they wrote Navi, which means prophet. And on 2 of them, it was blank. And they literally picked the pieces of paper, and 2 of them ended up not being chosen, not being prophets. So although they were initially in the pool of selection, these 2, and their names were Eldad and Medad, they were not part of the prophets. What happens is, as the spirit of prophecy gets separated from Moses upon the 70 individuals, it also leaks to these 2. Somehow it also leaks to these 2. And Joshua comes to Moses in a panic, and he says, Eldad and Medad, 2 names, Eldad and Medad, misnabim b'machaneh. They're saying prophecy in the camp on their own. I mean, they weren't together with the other 70 because they were like basically sent home, but they're saying prophecy now. He says, imprison them. Kiloim, imprison them. Lock them up. Stop them. So the Talmud says, again, in text 5, what is the meaning when Joshua panics and says to Moses, imprison them? He wasn't saying imprison them. He was saying, give them responsibility. Put them in a leadership role. Because you know what? That's the best way to get rid of somebody. Put them in a leadership role, and they will expire on their own. Kalayim, it's going to end them. You want to get rid of them? Give them responsibility, and you'll see they'll be running for the hills in short order. Tell me, from that statement of the Talmud, does that seem like leadership, public leadership, is a good thing or not a good thing? Not a good thing. It's at least very cynical about leadership, correct? At least we can say it's being very cynical. But we have mixed opinions or mixed sources on this. From Maimonides, which we quoted earlier, it seems that public service is the greatest order. And you don't even interrupt to say the Shema because you're serving the public. On the other hand, we're saying that public service burns people out, and essentially it seems to indicate that maybe you should avoid it. There are other sources as well. In Pirkei Avot, it says, be wary of those in power. They only befriend you when they need it, but when you need it, they run away. It says, stay away from government. And there's various sources that seem to indicate not to get involved, which is why, when it comes to Mordechai, by the end, when the story of Purim, the Megillah closes, and the Jews are safe, and Mordechai is still in the halls of Achashverosh, serving as, he took over from Haman, who was hanged. So he was now, one of the right-hand men of the king and cousins to the queen, and now he's in the palace hanging out there. Now we understand why some of his colleagues thought it was a good thing, but some of his colleagues disassociated themselves from him. Why? As they felt, what's a good Jewish boy doing in such a political position like that? Make sense?
What about Joshua? Or not Joshua, Joseph?
Yeah, it's a good question. What about Joseph? Yeah. Joseph,
We
huh?
got lots of them through time.
Yeah.
Viceroys, especially.
Yeah, but Joseph would be the biblical, right? The Torah, the 5 books of Moses example. Clearly, Yosef was somebody who did choose that position.
Yeah, but Joseph says it was God that chose him.
Right.
It wasn't his independent choice, like maybe it's
Right. And some of the commentaries are saying I can't say it's the source of the friction, but because he was that style that would end up as the viceroy of Egypt. That's why his brothers never liked him from the beginning. In other words, the type of guy who could end up in that position, they sniffed it out from the beginning. They didn't like him. He was just, I'm not justifying it.
Lots of twists.
I'm not. That's what we do here. It's all about twisting the stories. No, I'm kidding. But this is according to many of the commentaries, especially the mystical commentaries, the Hasidic commentaries. The understanding is that the brothers their experience of Judaism was very straight-laced and very by the book, and very much don't associate with power, don't associate with influence, don't associate with the kings and the princes. Like, stay away from all that stuff. It's going to distort your values. It's going to change your position. Just stay away from all that stuff. And so Joseph was clearly a guy who could integrate, who felt that he was able to walk those halls and maintain his identity. They couldn't relate to that. So that causes just a core friction, an essential friction between these two modalities. It's like, I mean, it's not so far off. You're talking about how we see this throughout history. After the war, or European immigrants to the United States, there were essentially two positions: those that said assimilate, and those that said put up the walls of put up essentially ghetto walls and block our community. Block them out from outside influences. So you have communities to this day. You have communities that are very insular in New York, in Israel, right? Mea She'arim, Kiryas Joel. You have communities, and this is not to denigrate, God forbid, anyone or otherwise. This is just to simply state that there were communities who felt that the only way to preserve would be to completely block out the influences. And said that if somebody is involved in the secular world, treif. And that's not different than the brothers looking at Joseph and saying, oh, this guy, treif. He's a danger. He's a danger to Judaism. He's a danger to Judaism. And then you have those that say, on the contrary, you have to be integrated. Then you have a Chabad approach, which is right in the middle, which is a little bit of this, a little bit of that, which is... Anyway, I don't want to focus and get lost in that, but that's the core idea of this conflict, where you have some individuals who believe that being in a position of leadership, if you're a Jew and a scholar and a respected Jew in a position of political leadership, that's great. And some would say, when are you going to study Torah? You're going to neglect your Jewish responsibilities, your personal responsibilities. What about all that stuff? So that's why literally the last verse of the Megillah says, Mordechai, everyone, the people loved him, and his colleagues, most of them were okay with him. And what about the others? They disapproved of his choice. And they felt the danger's over, right? Haman's gone. It's time to come home. Come back to the Sanhedrin. Come back to our community. You walking around in the capital city of Persia, wherever that was, Shushan, right? Why are you still there? What are you doing over there? He was there. He was there, but he went. I asked his exact schedule. I don't know, but even then, we might say that maybe he was there because things were brewing with Haman. Maybe there was this threat, so he had to be there to counterbalance. But now the threat's gone. Okay.
Rabbi Ari.
Yes, Mark.
There's two more things, I think, which were going on. Not the least of which is that in the Chumash it says that Persia defeated Babylonia. And Achashverosh was never a friend to the Jews, because the construction of the temple was going on under Babylonia, but under Achashverosh it stopped.
Excellent.
And it said there were only 47,000 Jews who were even involved. There was a disinterest. So the first question is, was Achashverosh even a friend to the Jews? And what are you doing with him in the first place?
I literally thought you were going to go the other way. You were so close to going the other way. You totally plot twisted us. Wow. I thought you were going to say, since Achashverosh, even after Haman is gone, is an anti-Semite.
Yeah.
And the same guy that can approve Haman's plot can do it again. So Mordechai feels like he has to remain in the palace. There's no choice. It's an existential threat. Just like he had to be there to avert the decree initially. It's an existential threat. He can't go home to the Sanhedrin. He doesn't have that luxury. I think we both thought that you were headed down that path. Mark,
I like that though. I like your take.
Such a great insight. That's, by the way, that is team. That ultimately, between you and I, we're going to get to other stuff in tonight's class. Some like very cool stuff. But ultimately, between you and I, that's most likely, if not 100%, the rationale of Mordechai. Mordechai felt that it was still a threat. Achashverosh still Achashverosh. A tiger doesn't change its stripes.
But he went that way, so he's the minority, you're the majority. If it's you and I, and he's the minority. That said, it's still that Ahasuerus is a bad guy. You shouldn't be associated with that.
Right.
Right?
So see that? So there's still a minority opinion that says, Mordechai, come home. Why are you hanging out with this guy? He's trouble. Good, right? So you could say that's very good. That's the dissenting opinion. And it was logic. Your original way that you would say would have said that your original path was to say, so get out of there. But you could use the same logic to say, no, you need to still be there. So, and again, there was conflict amongst his colleagues. Most were the opinion that it was good that he remained in the palace, but some said, Mordechai, come home. Like Sheldon, like the famous story with the guru's mom. All right. Now, joke number 23. Good. So let's move on because I have a few things to get to that are very important. A bunch of things actually to get to that are very important. So to understand this deeper, let's read a story. This is a great story. All right. Mike, please read this one. This is going to be text number 6. Okay, text number 6 in your books on page 140. Let me share the screen. Let's pull this up. All right. 3, 2, 1. Take it away.
After the previous Rebbe was forced to leave Russia and arrive in Riga, Latvia, he once attended a conference of rabbis, community leaders, and activists dedicated to the cause of Russian Jewry. The
Rogachover
Gaon was one of the participants. One of the suggestions at this conference was to establish a committee who would periodically meet and discuss how to best serve Russian Jewry. The Rogachover was asked to be a part of this committee. He demurred, stating that the decision to participate is hinged upon an argument between the Babylonian and Jerusalem Talmud.
Listen to this. Here, the Rogachover Gaon was an absolute genius of scholarship. So here, a bunch of rabbis were getting together to form a committee, an activism committee, to help Russian Jewry. And they asked him, this great rabbi, he was a guy, he was a Nazir, he didn't cut his hair. He gave the Rebbe, our Rebbe, smicha, rabbinical ordination. The Rebbe once said about him by Fabrengen, everyone has challenges in life. And this rabbi's challenge, the Rogachover's challenge was on Shabbat, when he was studying Talmud, and he couldn't write down his insights, and he would have new insights. And by the end of Shabbat, there was no way he would remember all of his insights because they were coming a mile a minute, and he couldn't write anything down, not even short notes. To him, that was painful. Rebbe was basically saying everyone has challenges in life, but where you put yourself, that is going to contextualize which sandbox your challenges are going to be in. Everyone's going to have in their area. Everyone's going to have challenges in their area. Might as well put yourself in an area where the challenges are not so bad because it's all about holy things. That was that advice. But anyway, the Rogachover was a real deal. Genius. So he was asked to be on this committee. So what's his answer? He says, I don't know, but probably not, because really it's based on, and this is all he says, it's based on an argument between the Babylonian and Jerusalem Talmud. What does that mean? What do these Talmudic sources say? So let's take a look at text 7a. Merle, please read text 7a. This is page 141.
The sages taught the early generations of pious men would wait 1 hour, pray 1 hour, then wait 1 hour again. This raises a question. Since the early pious men would spend 9 hours per day engaged in prayer, how is their Torah preserved? And how was their work accomplished? Rather, because they were pious and merited that their Torah is preserved and their work is blessed. So
let me just recap this very quickly. So the early generations of Hasidim, of pious men, they would pray for 9 hours a day because we have 3 prayer services a day. And it says about them that they would prepare for prayer for an hour. They would do the actual prayers for an hour. And then they would, I guess, cool down for an hour or whatever it is. It's like the build up, the prayer, and the cool down, 3 hours times 3 sessions per day, 9 hours. So the Talmud asks a question. When did they study Torah? When did they work? Talmud answers, because they were so pious, their Torah was preserved, and their work was blessed. One second. Take a look at the next one. Merle, please read this into the next one. That's the Babylonian Talmud. Here's how the Jerusalem Talmud phrases it, text 7b. And pay attention to the distinction. There's one word that's different.
Rabbi Eliezer said, because they were pious, their study was blessed, they were blessed.
What's the difference between the two sources? What's the difference between the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud? What is the difference?
Preserved versus blessed.
What is it?
Preserved versus blessed.
Oh, the Babylonian Talmud, it says their Torah study is preserved, their work is blessed. And the Jerusalem Talmud, both are blessed. Now, what's the difference between preserved and blessed? What do you think that means? Preserved versus blessed. What would it mean if you say that even though you're doing so many hours of prayer, don't worry about your Torah study because it's being preserved versus it's being blessed? What's the difference? Preserve means
Unaffected.
you're not, say it again. Saved, in other words, you're not going to lose your knowledge. Blessed means you're going to continue to increase. So again, according to the Babylonian Talmud, remember, these great men were praying for 9 hours a day. What about the Torah? What about the work? Babylonian Talmud says the Torah, they're not going to lose. They're not going to, right? They're not going to lose the Torah, and the work, they'll continue to make money. The Jerusalem Talmud says the Torah will also be blessed. Not just the work, and the Torah won't lose, the Torah will be blessed. In other words, in a little bit of time, they're going to continue to advance in Torah study. Now the question is, because we always like to keep on going deeper and ask deeper and deeper questions. Well, why do these two Talmudic bodies of scholarship differ about whether for these pious people the Torah will just be preserved or will also be blessed? What's at the core? So you could say different opinions, but what's at the core? What's driving the opinion? To understand what's driving the opinion, we need to understand what differentiates the Babylonian Talmud from the Jerusalem Talmud to begin with. What are these two systems of Talmud about? So on one foot, very quickly, here's the difference. The Babylonian Talmud, there's texts here, we're not going to read them inside. Babylonian Talmud is like someone who's grappling in the darkness for something. You know, it's like that story with the elephant, but you don't know it's an elephant, right? So this guy's touching this thing, huh? Exactly. One guy says, it feels like, but they don't know it's a tail. So that whatever they come up with, it feels like a pillar of something. It's a leg. One says, whatever it is, they come up with different things, but they're grappling in the darkness. And maybe at the end, they'll put it together and say, it's an elephant. We figured it out. But to get there, trial and error, false starts, false, misunderstandings, questions, answers, collaboration is needed until you come together. That's how the Babylonian Talmud works. If you've ever studied the Talmud, typically we say the Babylonian Talmud. When you study the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, it's exactly what it sounds. Bunch of rabbis trying to figure stuff out, and people are bumping into things along the way. But it's fun. The Jerusalem Talmud is very much focused on results. It's very much result oriented. Halacha, it's clear, straightforward. And the reason, the question is, why is that the difference? Okay, why that distinction? You could always keep on going deeper. Ultimately, we get to a place where we say, Jerusalem Talmud was written in Israel. The scholars lived in Israel. And in Israel, there's greater spiritual clarity and light. So when you're in the light and the elephant's in the light, you're not grappling in the darkness to arrive at the truth. So the Jerusalem Talmud is straightforward. The Babylonian Talmud is outside of the land of Israel. It's in a space of spiritual and Torah darkness, as it were, relative to Israel. And thus, when you try to arrive at Torah conclusions in Babylonia, it's going to take a minute. You guys with me? And therefore, that explains understanding the core difference between the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud will help us understand why they had different positions about, well, what happens if you pray for 9 hours a day? What's going to happen with Torah? In Israel, you know what they said? Oh, you'll be fine. Your Torah will be blessed. Why? Because in Israel, you don't need that much time. It's pragmatic. You understand what yeah, you with me? In Israel, the light's shining. You pray 9 hours a day, still have some more time. What's going to happen with the Torah? You can still study. You can still advance. It will be blessed. In Babylonia, they say, you know what's going to happen to the Torah? At least you won't lose it. At least you won't lose what you already have. In other words, if you now step into, I'm going to pray for 9 hours a day. Well, what about all the Torah? Mishtameres. It'll be guarded. It'll be safe. We're going to put it in a safe deposit box. You're not going to lose. What about advancing? You need a little bit more time. In Babylonia, you need time to figure stuff out. You guys with me so far?
But there were two different feelings, but in Babylon, they got the feeling that were exiled, so the guilty, and then Jerusalem, they were free.
Let's hold off on that. Let's hold off on that for a second. So now, because I'm putting together a bit of a puzzle here. I want to make sure that we're step by stepping. So now, again, the Rogachover, let's go back to that conference of great rabbis, right? They're back to the conference. So the great rabbis got together, and the issue was Russian Jewry. And this is like by communist Russia when communism was first, getting involved. So now the question is, what do we do? So they asked the Rogachover, can you join? Can you be an activist? He says, well, it depends on if you hold like the Babylonian Talmud or the Jerusalem Talmud. What was he saying? He's saying is, if you hold like the Jerusalem Talmud, I can join and be an activist, and I'll still have plenty of time for Torah, or I can still advance in Torah with the little time that I have. But if you hold like the Babylonian Talmud, sorry, I don't want to drop. I don't want to drop my Torah. I don't want it to just. I don't lose my Torah. I still want to advance, and therefore I'm going to have to say no. Now, when you have a dispute between the two Talmuds, who wins in halacha, in Jewish law? When you have a dispute between the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud, everyone around this table, everyone would, based on what we've explained, everyone would say the Jerusalem Talmud. It's not true.
Yeah, I was wondering.
You go by the Babylonian Talmud.
It's full.
You always paskin. Halacha is always like Babylonian Talmud. Why? It's the product, because through the darkness, you get to greater depth. Sometimes in the light, like I started the class, in plain sight, you miss things. You know when we search for chametz? You know how you do it? In the dark. You know why? Because when you have all the lights on, you don't see anything. When you have all the lights off and you have a little candle, and you walk around, you're paying attention to everything. In the darkness, you see more. Obviously, you need a little bit of light. But that's a Babylonian Talmud. It's like there's no light. People have heads. They're figuring stuff out. It takes longer, but you're noticing all the details. Whereas in the light, you can gloss over, you move quickly, but you gloss over. Haste makes waste. So what's the point? So the Rogachover says he demurred. I love that word. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but I love it anyway. It says in the Yiddish is even better. Hat sich aber abgesagt. Abgesagt means abgesagt. No, abgesagt. Abgesagt means he said, I don't know, not for me. You ever ask somebody something and they're like, and you're like, all right, I know your answer. You don't have to go on. I know it's a no. He said, the Babylonian Jerusalem Talmud dispute. All right. Because in halacha, you go by Babylonian Talmud. And the Babylonian Talmud says, your Torah study, you're not going to advance. So he says, I'm not giving it up. Now we understand that really what was going on in the Sanhedrin, in the halls of the Jewish high court, when Mordechai stayed in the palace, and the Megillah, the very last verse of the Megillah is, the people loved him, and his colleagues, most of them approved of what he did. And we said before, what scandal is this? What kind of villain was Mordechai that only most of his colleagues, but not all of his colleagues? We said before, it's because he stayed in the halls of power. He stayed in the halls of politics. Now we understand why. In the Sanhedrin, who comprised this? Sanhedrin was in Israel. The judges in Sanhedrin were primarily from Israel. So the Israeli justices, his Israeli colleagues said about what Mordechai, he's good, because even though he spends a lot of time in the halls of Persia, in Shushan, he'll study a little bit and he'll be okay, because in Israel, that's perspective. But the Sanhedrin was, remember, the story of Purim happens. We would really need a timeline here. The story of Purim happens in between the first and second temple era, toward the beginning of the second temple era, before it was built, but while at a point in time when Jews were starting already to return back to Israel. They had already started, which means that there were some Babylonian sages people that had, grown up or studied in Babylonia that were now coming back to Israel, which means that there were some Babylonians on the court. So now when we ask the question, well, which colleagues were pro Mordechai's involvement in politics and which were against it? You know what the answer is? The Israeli colleagues were fine, because remember, you don't need that much time to advance in Torah. But the Babylonian colleagues, because they knew from their experience and opinion, you need a long time to study. And now he's going to neglect the studies. Like the Rogachover, they said, you should say no. You with me on this? Yes. All makes sense. I think we tied everything up into a bow, except for one last. Being that this is the last verse in the Megillah, what's clear is that it's a lesson for us all. So here's what the Rebbe says about this. Here's what the Lubavitcher Rebbe says about this. You can ascribe to the Babylonian view, to the Rogachover view, and say, I'm sorry, there's a need, but I can't help you because my Torah study is very important. And the halacha is like the Babylonian Talmud. And all of that is fine and true. But at the end of the day, when there's a need, who's thinking about themselves? Who can afford to think, even if you're not going to advance in your own space, you're going to put someone else at risk or let someone remain languishing at risk because you want to advance? That's the height of selfishness. Not calling out anybody, and this is not a critique of the Rogachover. He had his own calculations, and that's fine. But for you and I in 2023 to say to ourselves, I can't help you because I have my own self-growth, because I have my own self-growth. I'm worried about my own growth. In other words, I can't help you get even to the baseline because I need to continue to ascend. That's not, it's like what the author writes in Tanya. Toward the end of Tanya has multiple books. Toward the end of the whole thing, he says, I've been hearing reports about tzedakah, that people are not giving because they're saying that we don't have enough money for ourselves, for our own needs, so we can't give. He says, but you have to make sure that the needs are equivalent. If you're saying I don't have enough money for my own Shabbos and Yom Tov because you can't buy the first cut brisket, but meanwhile this guy can't afford Shabbat candles or wine for Kiddush, that's not. You with me on this? Can't say I need the money for my briskets. I can't give you for your basic survival. That's not equivalent. So the Rebbe says that when it comes to these type of calculations, if someone's in need, and the story of Purim, as we've established, thank you, Mark, for this, for helping us establish this. The story of Purim is physical need, physical risk. Remember, Achashverosh was still in charge. He's a loose cannon, an unknown, whatever. And there's a phrase for this. He's an unknown
quantity.
An unknown quantity, right? We don't know what his deal is. We don't know when something's going to trigger him and he's going to go back again to be okay with the annihilation, God forbid, the annihilation of the Jewish people. So Mordechai felt like this is a need. He's going to lose himself. He himself is going to lose out. Sometimes you don't even think about that. I'll conclude with the final story. That doesn't speak exactly to this, but I think speaks to this in a very powerful way in general. One of the great rabbis of the Talmudic and Mishnaic era was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And he was the guy that famously the Talmud tells us when the Romans were besieging Jerusalem to destroy it, that this is the second temple, just mixing eras. So this was our story tonight was toward the beginning of the second temple era, toward the end between the first and second temples. Now I'm telling you a story that happens at the end of the second temple era when the temple was destroyed by the Romans. So Vespasian, the Roman general, is leading the siege on Jerusalem. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai smuggles himself out of this. He fakes his own death, and he smuggles himself out of Jerusalem in a coffin. And he meets Vespasian. And he basically asked the Torah be preserved, and he's a hero to this very day, because who knows if he didn't ask for that. I mean, obviously God runs the world, but on the ground, he's the one who, although the temple was destroyed, he was able to secure a space for Judaism to continue. Have Torah will travel. That was Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai. On his own deathbed, he was crying. And his students asked him, why are you crying? And he said, because I don't know, be'eze, I'm quoting verbatim, be'eze derech molichin osi. I do not know which direction they are going to take me. You know what that means?
He's a good guy or a bad guy.
Heaven or hell? I obviously not the way, in popular, heaven or hell, straight up. I don't know. I'm crying on my deathbed, he says, because I don't know. I don't know where I'm going to go. And the commenters ask the question, are you kidding me? Is he kidding? Is he kidding? False humility is also not cool. Is he so delusional? He doesn't know that he's the guy who rescued Judaism on the. I mean, he's one of the greatest sages of all time, and he doesn't know where he's going to go. Come on, you got to be kidding me! How non-self-aware? So the Rebbe explains something beautiful. You know why he didn't know? Because he lived his life dedicated. He lived his life dedicated to a mission and not constantly checking in with himself. We asked, how could he be so not self-aware? Because he didn't take the time to be self-aware. He was just doing and living. He was in the moment and not analyzing himself out of the moment. It's like when you're at a wedding and you're dancing, and then you realize that everyone's looking at you, and then it becomes awkward. So initially you were in the moment and you were feeling it. And then you're like, oh, let me go to the bar. That beverage looks really enticing right now. Let me not dance for the rest of the night. You just become self-aware. Self-awareness is the worst. Why do you think Shaquille O'Neal couldn't hit a free throw? Was that it?
Yeah, you refused to.
Oh, really? Oh, well then, all right, let's just go with me. Yeah, come on, man. No, don't mix facts into this. I mean, because but for argument's sake, you have a guy who could make shots, but he just freezes. And you know what's happening in that moment? Overthinking it. The kryptonite to being in the flow is thinking too much. Think too much, get out of the flow. If you're in the moment, it can flow. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai lived his life in the flow. At the end of his life, he was thinking, hold on, because his journey's over. Now he's not doing, he's now reflecting for the first time. This is the way the Rebbe explains it. And so now he's thinking, he's now wondering, I've never thought about this type of question. Where am I? Who am I? What am I? What does it mean for us? You can be in your head and say, like the Rugged, again, it's not a critique against Rugged. You can be in your head and say, I've studied this, right? I came to the boot camp. According to the Babylonian Talmud, I'm only gonna, no, it's legit. It's a legit boot camp. According to the Babylonian Talmud the halach is like, my Torah study is only going to be preserved, but it's not going to increase, and that's not good enough for me. I want it to increase. I don't have time to help someone else. I could say that. Or you could be so present and attuned to what's needed from you that you don't even ask the question. So when a need arises, when somebody needs something, the first response is, yes, hineni, I am here. I am present. It's one of the most beautiful words of Torah. Hineni, I am fully present and available. Not, let me check in and see if maybe I have time to squeeze in for you to help you out. Hineni, I'm here, I'm ready to serve. And so the message of the Megillah, the message of the last verse of the Megillah, that everyone says out loud, but we don't pay attention to because we want to go eat hamantashen, right? The message of the last verse of the Megillah is, Mordechai said, Hineni. And a debate broke out amongst his colleagues, but it didn't matter because Mordechai knew that there was a need and he was going to be there. May we all feel the calling that we each have in our own lives, in our own circumstances, the call of whatever hour it is, whether it's to help someone physically, to help someone spiritually, whether it's psychologically or emotionally, on whatever level. And let's step up like Mordechai without too many calculations and be there for the other. Thank you for joining me tonight. Happy Purim.